Hello, NDE narrator. My name is Amina Rahim. I am 30 years old, born and raised in Kermanshah, a city in western Iran surrounded by dry hills and the scent of dust and diesel. I grew up in a small apartment above my father's grocery shop where the sound of the azan, the Muslim call to prayer, was like the heartbeat of our street. I married young, at 20, to a man named Abib who worked as a truck driver near the border with Iraq. We were not rich, but we had peace. Every morning I cooked for him, swept our home, and waited for the evening when he would return smelling of gasoline and tea. He was kind, quiet, and prayed 5 times a day without fail. My life was ordinary, filled with small duties, faith, and the love of a man who made my world feel safe. I still remember the morning of the last day I saw him. He woke before dawn for far prayer, wrapped his scarf around his neck, and kissed my forehead. "Pray for my safety, Amina," he said. I smiled and replied, "Allah is with you." His truck rattled away down the narrow road, taillights fading into the fog. I stood by the window, watching until he disappeared beyond the curve. That day felt no different from others, except that the sky was strangely red, and the wind carried a chill that didn't belong to spring. I returned to my chores, humming verses from the Quran under my breath, not knowing that within hours, my world would shatter. By late afternoon, I heard a distant explosion echoing from the west. At first, I thought it was thunder, but then came another sound, a deep rumble that shook the glass panes. People rushed into the street, shouting that there had been an airstrike near the border. I froze, my broom dropping from my hand. My neighbor, Fatme, ran upstairs breathless, shouting, "Amina, the Americans bombed a convoy near Sarpali Zahab." My heart stopped. That was the route Abib always took. I tried to pray, but my voice trembled too hard for words. I grabbed my phone and called him again and again, but there was no answer. Just the hollow tone that repeated, "The number you have dialed is unavailable." The sun dipped behind the mountains, and every passing minute felt like a lifetime of dread. That night, Kermanshah went silent. News channels reported a targeted drone strike on suspected militants near the border. The announcer's voice was calm, but his words pierced me like knives. Several vehicles were destroyed, casualties unknown. I sat by the window clutching Abib's prayer beads, whispering, "Ya Allah, please bring him back." The streetlights flickered as the call to Isha prayer echoed across the rooftops. When I heard the imam's voice tremble in his recitation, I knew the rumors were true. Someone knocked on my door, 3 slow knocks that broke my last hope. I opened it to see 2 men from Abib's company, their faces pale as ash. One held his hat to his chest. "Sister Amina," he said softly. Abib's truck was among those hit. The rest of his words dissolved into the wail that rose from my throat. My knees gave way, and the world turned black. The next morning, the city's air felt heavy. Our neighborhood women came to my home carrying trays of rice and dates. They covered my mirror, tied a black cloth over my head, and murmured verses of comfort. My mother held my hands as I sat on the floor staring at the empty doorway. In our faith, we say, "Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un." We belong to Allah, and to Him we return. But those words tasted hollow. I kept hearing the sound of that explosion in my mind, over and over. They said the US drone had targeted a militant transport, but Abib was no fighter. He was a driver, a husband, a believer. He carried oil, not weapons. Why would Allah let such injustice happen? Why would America destroy innocent lives and call it defense? For weeks, I couldn't sleep. Every corner of the house reminded me of him. The teacup still resting on the shelf, the scent of his cologne trapped in his jacket, his Quran lying open at Surah Al-Rahman. I pressed my face to his clothes every night, begging Allah to let me see him again, even in a dream. People told me to be strong, that my husband had become a shaheed, a martyr, and that paradise awaited him. But I didn't feel peace. I felt anger. I felt betrayed by heaven and earth. When I went to the mosque, the imam told me to have patience and faith. He said, "Allah tests those He loves most." But I wanted to scream. I didn't want to be tested. I wanted my husband back. One evening, I walked to the cemetery outside Kermanshah where the fresh graves of drone victims lay under small white stones. I carried roses and laid them where his name was carved, Abib Rahimi, age 32. I sat there for hours, watching the sky turn from orange to dark blue. A little boy was playing near the graves, pretending to shoot an invisible gun. His laughter echoed through the still air. I wondered what kind of world raised children under the shadow of war. When I finally rose to leave, I whispered to Abib, "If paradise is real, wait for me." The wind answered softly, stirring the hem of my black chatter. After Abib's death, our home became my prison. I stopped cooking, stopped visiting friends, stopped answering calls. My family worried, but they didn't understand. Every sound of a passing aircraft made my heart pound. Sometimes I imagined I heard Abib's voice calling from the hallway. The loneliness was unbearable. My faith began to twist into something else. Half belief, half bitterness. I still prayed, but not with peace. My prayers became arguments. "Why Allah?" I would whisper. "Why did you take him and leave me in darkness?" Each day I drifted further from the gentle faith I once knew. Months passed. The city moved on, but I didn't. The market reopened, children played again, and weddings filled the evenings with music. Yet I stayed trapped in my sorrow. One day, I found myself standing outside the same internet cafe where Abib used to check maps for his routes. I went inside, just to feel close to him, but ended up scrolling through news articles about drone strikes, about revenge, about American crimes in the Middle East. My tears blurred the screen as I read story after story. That was the day something dangerous began to grow inside me. A belief that maybe the world owed me justice, that maybe pain could be answered with pain. Still, even in my anger, I was lost. Some nights, I walked along the border road where Abib had worked, looking at the distant hills that hid the line between Iran and Iraq. The soldiers stationed there nodded when they saw my black scarf and hollow eyes. They didn't stop me. I think they saw too many like me. Wives turned widows, prayers turned to rage. On one of those nights, I saw small lights moving far off in the desert, like stars crawling on earth. A man beside me whispered, "Those are drones." His voice was flat, almost numb. "They watch us even in our sleep." I shivered. It felt like Allah had turned his face away and left machines to rule the sky. When I returned home that night, I opened Abib's old phone, which I had kept sealed in a drawer since his death. The screen was cracked, but still worked. In his gallery, I found pictures of us at the bazaar smiling. In his notes, there was a line I had never read before. "Amina, if I don't come back, promise you will live." I read it again and again until my tears blurred the letters. "Promise you will live." But I didn't know how. Every breath felt borrowed. Every sunrise felt wrong. I began to envy the dead. I thought of the stories my grandmother used to tell, about martyrs who entered paradise and met their loved ones in golden palaces. I wanted to believe that somewhere beyond this broken world, Abib was waiting for me in a house made of light. As the first anniversary of his death approached, the mosque organized prayers for the martyrs of the border. I attended, sitting at the back among other widows dressed in black. The imam spoke passionately about sacrifice, about the reward promised by Allah for those who die defending Islam. He quoted the Quran, "Do not think of those who are slain in the way of Allah as dead. They are alive with their Lord, receiving provision." The women beside me whispered, "Amin." I nodded, but my mind was far away, picturing Abib walking through gardens filled with gold, smiling, waiting. A woman next to me touched my shoulder and whispered, "May Allah unite you with him in paradise." Her words felt like both comfort and invitation. That night I dreamt of him. He stood in a shining room made of gold, smiling, reaching out his hand. "Come, Amina," he said softly. "The house is ready." When I woke, my heart was pounding, my pillow wet with tears. I thought maybe Allah was sending me a sign. Maybe this grief was not the end, but the beginning of a greater purpose. I didn't know it then, but that dream would become the doorway to everything that followed. The wound in my heart had turned into a calling, one that whispered of reunion, of justice, and of paradise beyond pain. After that night, silence became my only companion. The echoes of Abib's laughter still lingered in every corner of the house, but now they only mocked me. Days passed without meaning, and nights stretched endlessly, filled with the emptiness of someone waiting for a voice that would never speak again. I stopped opening the curtains. I stopped answering calls from my mother. Even the Quran on the shelf began to gather dust. I prayed, but my prayers felt cold, like words thrown into a void. Sometimes I sat by the window for hours, watching the world go on. Children walking to school, men buying bread, women gossiping by the corner shop, all of them untouched by my grief. Inside, I was crumbling. The pain had settled in my bones like winter frost, and I felt the chill no matter how many blankets I wrapped around myself. It was during one of those sleepless nights that I turned on Habib's old laptop. It was an old Dell he had used for work, still bearing his fingerprints on the keyboard. The screen flickered as it powered up, showing a simple wallpaper. Our photo from Isfahan, standing by the bridge of Kaju, smiling into the sunlight. I stared at that image for a long time before opening the browser. Without thinking, I searched the words "Wives of Martyrs in Islam." Thousands of results appeared: forums, blogs, Quranic studies, and videos. I began to read stories of women who had lost their husbands to war, who found peace through faith, who believed that their sacrifices were written in the Book of Allah. Some of them wrote about dreams where they saw their husbands in paradise. Their words made my heart ache, but also gave me a strange comfort. Maybe I wasn't alone in my pain after all. Over the next days, I began visiting those pages more often. They became my escape from the silence of my apartment. One site caught my attention more than others. It was called The Path of Light for Widows of the Faithful. The background was black, with golden Arabic letters glowing like fire. It shared verses from the Quran about patience and martyrdom, but also stories about revenge and sacrifice. The tone was different, softer, yet somehow sharper. The women in the forum wrote about their losses, but they also spoke of purpose, of continuing their husbands' missions. One message read, "My husband died fighting the enemies of Islam. I will not waste his blood. I will join him soon, inshallah." The replies were filled with hearts, verses, and words like bravery and honor. I felt a strange pull, like the site was speaking directly to my wounded heart. I created a profile under the name Habib, mother of Habib, because I wanted to carry his name even in the digital world. At first, I only read and listened. Women from Iraq, Syria, Yemen, and even France shared stories about losing husbands, fathers, and brothers to bombings or military raids. Some posted pictures of their loved ones, framed with Quranic verses and captions saying, "We will meet in Jannah." I commented on one post, writing, "I lost my husband too. He was not a fighter, but he was killed near the border. I feel empty. How do you bear it?" Within minutes, someone replied. Her name was Sister Zainab. Her message was gentle, written in warm Persian mixed with Arabic phrases. She said, "My dear Amina, your husband is a martyr, and he waits for you in the gardens of gold. Do not cry. Paradise is closer than you think." That message felt like a lifeline thrown into my darkness. I wrote back, and soon we began chatting privately. Zainab said she was from Basra, Iraq. She told me she had also lost her husband in a U.S. airstrike 2 years earlier. "I wanted to die," she confessed. But then I learned that Allah never wastes a widow's tears. Every tear is counted, every pain is seen. If you endure with faith, He will reward you. Your husband waits for you in a mansion of gold, built by angels. I read her words again and again. Mansion of gold. Those words stirred something inside me. It was exactly like my dream. I told her about the dream where I saw Habib standing in a golden house, calling to me. She replied instantly, "That was not a dream, my sister. That was a promise." Her words wrapped around my heart like silk and chains at the same time. Soon, Zainab introduced me to other women in a private chat group. There was Sister Layla from Mosul, Sister Maryam from Aleppo, and others whose names I can no longer remember. They called me our new sister in grief. They sent me recordings of Arabic nashts, soft songs about martyrdom, about reunion in paradise, about Allah's mercy on the faithful. I would play them at night, letting the slow drums and haunting voices fill the empty apartment. I cried as I listened, imagining Habib smiling beyond the clouds. Sometimes, Zainab would message me late at night with verses from the Quran, telling me, "Do not think of those who die in the path of Allah as dead. They are alive with their Lord provided for." I whispered the verse aloud, feeling it seep into me like medicine. For the first time in months, I felt a kind of peace, though I did not realize it was poison disguised as comfort. Days turned into weeks. My life began to revolve around that chat group. I barely left my apartment except to buy food or visit the internet cafe when my connection failed. The owner, an old man named Karim, noticed my routine. "You come here every evening now," he said kindly one day. I smiled faintly and replied, "It helps me forget." He nodded, unaware of what I was reading behind the dim glow of the screen. The cafe smelled of burnt coffee and cigarette smoke. Men argued softly about politics, and teenagers played games, laughing. But in the corner seat where I sat with my black scarf drawn low, the world felt far away. I would log into the path of light and read the new messages. "Sister Amina," Zainab wrote one night, "Allah has chosen you for something greater. He saw your tears and turned them into strength." At first, I didn't understand what she meant. I typed, "Greater? I am only a widow. I have nothing left." She replied, "That is exactly why Allah will use you. You have nothing to lose. The world took your husband. The unbelievers killed him. But you can take back honor, and your reward will be beyond anything you can imagine." My heart beat faster. I stared at her message for a long time before replying. "I just want to see him again." She responded, "Then you will, my sister. Allah has prepared a house of gold in paradise where husband and wife are reunited forever. But first, you must prove your faith. Will you let me show you the path?" My fingers trembled over the keyboard. I didn't answer that night. I couldn't, but her words stayed with me like a haunting song. Every evening, as the call to Maghrib prayer echoed through the streets, I would light a candle near Abib's photo and open my laptop. Zainab would already be online waiting. She began teaching me about what she called the deeper jihad of the soul. She explained that true Muslims must defend Islam, not only through prayer, but through action. "The West wants to erase us," she said. "They destroy our families and call it justice. They kill our husbands and call it defense. But Allah sees, and He will reward those who fight back." I listened silently, feeling both fear and fascination. Her voice in the audio messages was calm, persuasive, motherly. She never shouted. She made vengeance sound like devotion. And in my broken state, I wanted to believe her. Sometimes, she would ask me to imagine the day I would stand before Allah with Abib beside me, the golden mansion shining behind us. "Wouldn't that be worth every pain?" she whispered through voice notes. I closed my eyes and pictured it, Abib's smile, the light, the peace. It felt so real that tears ran down my cheeks. I didn't realize she was slowly replacing my grief with something else, purpose. I began to spend less time praying and more time reading what she sent. PDFs filled with selective Quran verses about fighting, short sermons from unknown imams, and videos of widows praising their martyred husbands. Each night, my heart grew harder, but I thought it was faith growing stronger. Then one night, as rain beat softly against my window, Zainab asked me, "Amina, do you forgive the ones who killed your husband?" I hesitated. The thought of forgiveness felt impossible. "No," I typed finally. She replied, "Then why do you let them live in peace while you suffer? Why do you cry when you could act?" I stared at her message, feeling a strange heat rise in my chest. Act? What could I possibly do? I wrote, "I am just one woman." She answered, "So was Sumaya, the first martyr in Islam. Her faith shook the world. Yours can too." That night, I couldn't sleep. The idea echoed in my mind like a prayer turned into a curse. Could my pain really serve a purpose? Could my death mean something holy? By the end of that month, I no longer recognized myself. My reflection looked older, my eyes darker. But inside I felt alive for the first time since Abib's death. The grief that once buried me had turned into a fire I couldn't control. I stopped visiting the mosque. I told myself I didn't need the local imam's sermons. They were too soft, too forgiving. The sisters online spoke of courage, of divine justice, of a paradise where Abib and I would live again in golden peace. "The world cannot heal you," Zainab said in her last message of the week. "Only sacrifice can." Those words became a seed in my heart, ready to bloom into something deadly. And though I didn't know it then, the path I was walking was no longer the path of faith. It was the path of destruction, disguised in the whisper of holy words. When Zainab told me the madrasa in Baghdad would host a special retreat for widows, my heart jumped. She said it was a place of learning and healing, a place where women could read the Quran together and remember their husbands in peace. The invitation felt like a kindness at first. I told my mother I was going to a women's study program for a few weeks. She kissed my forehead and said a prayer. I packed a small bag with the same hands that had folded Habib's shirts for months. The plane ride to Baghdad felt unreal. I watched the land below change from the dusty hills of Kermanshah to the flat plains of Iraq, and told myself I was going for comfort, for prayer. I still had not accepted that my life had changed forever, but I carried a small flame of hope because the sisters online had promised it. Arriving at the compound was quiet and cold in a way I did not expect. The madrasa sat behind a high wall with a single wooden gate. Women in long black robes moved like shadows across the courtyard. They welcomed me with soft words and a tray of tea. A woman named Khadija met me at the gate. She had a voice that did not shout, but made people listen. Her eyes were kind and sharp. She held my hand and said, "Sister Amina, you are safe here. This is a home for the broken." The other women called her our mother. They wrapped me in a shawl and led me to a small whitewashed room. The bed was plain and clean. For the first time since Habib's death, someone touched my hair and said, "You are not alone." The first days were gentle. We read the Quran, we memorized short verses, and we shared our stories in a circle. In those hours, the sisters were comforting and tender. They taught me to pray like a child learning again. Slowly, with hope, they fed me warm food, and the nights felt less sharp. But beneath the comfort, there was always talk of duty. In private conversations, women would lower their voices and say, "The enemy will not rest." They showed me videos and stories of men who had given their lives for the faith. They spoke of reward and reunion in a tone that framed pain as honor. The madrasa wrapped sorrow in noble language and called it holy. Soon, classes changed from soft recitation to lessons about purpose. We were shown stories from history, not the full story, but fragments chosen to press the right buttons. They highlighted battles and sacrifices, then quickly moved to the promise of heaven for those who do not fear death for the cause. They quoted verses and hadiths in parts, never fully, and always with a meaning that served the teacher's goals. When anyone asked a question about mercy and kindness, the elders would say, "Those verses are for another time." Doubt was tolerated only until it threatened the group. I asked once about forgiveness, and a woman with a voice like polished steel said, "Forgiveness is not for the ones who kill our children." Her words landed on me like a stone. The madrasa life was communal and quiet. We rose for far, shared small tasks, and attended long evenings of study. In the dining hall, women would whisper about the streets and the strikes and how some men were not safe. They told me that Habib's death was not an accident. It was part of a bigger plan that hurt our people. I listened and felt my anger grow new strength. The sisters called each other by respectful titles and often used the word martyr, as if it were a promise rather than an end. I wrote letters to my mother back home, saying only that I was safe. I could not tell her that the madrasa had become a place where sorrow was shaped into a call. At night, Khadija would sometimes sit with me and ask about the dream I once told the chat group. That golden house where Habib waited. She would nod slowly and say, "Yes, you saw what Allah will prepare for those who are faithful." She described in vivid words mansions of light and gardens that never end. The language she used was gentle and certain. She made the image feel like destiny. I wanted to believe her. When my heart ached and my hands shook, she would press a warm palm to my head and whisper, "You will be reunited." Her touch soothed me and bound me at the same time. Gradually, the madrasa tightened like a rope. We were asked to hand over our phones for safekeeping, they said, to help us focus. I gave mine without protest. The next days felt smaller. We were not allowed to leave the compound alone. Visitors came and left through the gate, and male teachers from other places would arrive sometimes to give lectures. The outside world became a voice transmitted through the elders and their chosen materials. If anyone received a letter from home suggesting a softer path, it was set aside. The instructors wanted hearts that did not look back. They wanted resolve that was simple and absolute. Other women were chosen for special tasks, and I watched them go without questions. They left with a group and returned with faces that had become closed, like those who carry a grave inside them. I began to see that the madrasa was not merely a school. It was a place that reassured and then remade. The teachers were careful. They never forced a woman into anything immediately. They fed trust first, then whispered about honor, then asked for small acts of proof. A small act might be giving away a cherished photo or burning a letter from a father. The acts were framed as purification. I remember burning an old picture of a Habib I had kept in my drawer. My hands shook as the paper curled to ash. I felt like I had given away a piece of myself, and then felt empty and strangely proud. One evening, an older sister named Layla called us to the hall. The lamps were lower, and the women sat close together. Layla spoke about the rewards of martyrdom. She painted pictures with words, gardens with rivers, plates of sweet fruit, garments that shine like the dawn. She told us that in paradise, husbands and wives who died for the faith would live together forever in homes built by angels. Imagine a house full of gold for you and your husband, she said, and her voice was gentle but her eyes were steady. I could feel the air of the room change. The image of that house pressed against me, soothing something raw. The sisters around me nodded, as if they had known this truth for years. I began to see the madrasa through new eyes. It was a refuge that also taught me to hate the people who had taken Habib. They did not call names, but they pointed to the sky and the machines that had killed, and then to countries beyond our borders. They taught that some paths of faith require the hardest returns. I asked how a woman like me could serve. They answered with stories of women in the past whose small acts opened doors for great causes. They taught that sometimes a woman's devotion was the final proof of love. What greater act to show your love than to join him where he waits? One teacher asked, and the hall was silent except for the rustle of scarves. The madrasa encouraged secret devotion. We were asked to pray extra at night and to spend time reflecting on the faces of those we lost. They taught us how to make our grief a constant prayer. We would sit together, and sometimes we chanted lines that spoke of victory and reunion. Those chants built something inside me, a belief that my suffering was meaningful. I began to think of Habib less as lost, and more as waiting for me in a place of splendor. The dream of the golden house became not a memory, but a mission. I started to imagine that if I gave everything, if I proved myself, then my hands would finally be steady enough to cross any bridge. There were also tests of loyalty. One day a teacher asked me to describe what I wanted most after death. I said, without meaning to hold Habib's hand. She smiled and said, then let your longing sharpen your will. It sounded spiritual and tender, but it also sounded like a plan. Appointments were made for private lessons with elder sisters who would speak softly about courage. They sent me written words from far places praising women who had done great things. I kept those pages under my pillow. Each note felt like a small command from the future. At times I resisted in private. Thoughts came like whispers. What if I am wrong? What if this is not the path Allah loves? Those doubts were met with silence or gentle correction. The elders would remind us that the path of ease was a trap meant by enemies to keep us weak. They said real faith requires sacrifice. Their words made my small protests feel selfish. The more I listened, the more my heart hardened. The grief that had once made me soft had been reshaped into something like armor. I could not see then that the armor was also a cage. Toward the end of my stay, they began to speak of reunion more directly. Layla brought a small booklet and read aloud words promising palaces and light. She said, "You who have given your sorrow, know that your reward will be greater than anything you can imagine. Your husband waits in a mansion of gold." The words were not just poetry, they were a map. I repeated them like a prayer and felt something in me settle. The madrasa had done its work. It had taken the raw wound and dressed it in purpose. I left that compound with a new name in my heart. No longer only Amina the widow, but Amina chosen, Amina pledged. When I said goodbye to Khadija at the gate, she reached out and kissed my forehead. "Go in peace," she said. "Walk with certainty. Allah is with you." I stepped into the dusty road toward Baghdad and felt both lighter and more afraid than I had ever been. In my pocket, I carried a small cloth with sewn verses and the smell of the madrasa's tea. I felt ready to face whatever test might come, because the idea of the golden house had become the reason I could breathe. I did not know then that the road from a house of whitewashed walls to a promised mansion of gold was a path lined with lies that would ask of me everything. We left the madrasa before dawn, the sky a flat gray like a cloth stretched too tight. The women moved quietly, voices low, folding their scarves and touching the small cloths we had been given. I still had the stitched verses in my pocket and the image of the golden house burning in my mind. We traveled in a small column of pickup trucks and a larger truck carrying supplies. They said the mission was precise and blessed. 2 small teams, one to create a distraction, the other to reach the target. I did not ask for details. Questions were not welcomed in the way of purpose. The road to Soweto felt long and strange, a road that smelled of dust and oil and the dry heat of a land used to war. Each mile we drove took me further from the whitewashed room where they had told me my reward waited. Inside the vehicle, the women sat close together, faces covered, hands folded. The leadership had given us names for the road. Quiet, powerful names that made us feel part of something bigger than our grief. I felt the weight of the small device hidden beneath my robe, wrapped and silent. I had been told only what a woman must know. The journey, the timing, the moment. They spoke to me of reunion, of the mansion of gold standing ready for me and Abib. I repeated the promise until it steadied me. Outside the window, the desert passed like a slow, broken clock, dried riverbeds, scattered stones, the occasional house with smoke rising like a flimsy flag. The convoy moved with a quiet tension, like a prayer that held its breath. As we neared the border into southern Syria, the landscape changed. Hills rose and fell, and the sky grew heavy with dust. A sandstorm began to blow along the road, turning the air into a blind curtain. The drivers slowed, headlights cutting weak paths through the grit. At checkpoints, we gave the same story. We were women on a religious retreat carrying food and medicine. No one asked too many questions. They were used to travelers and to people with urgent faces. I clutched my prayer beads until they left red marks on my palm. The small group with me spoke only when necessary. There were whispers about increased air activity in the region. Planes had been seen circling by night. We were told to be careful, but to keep moving. In the wind, our convoy seemed like a fragile thing moving inside a larger storm. We did not sleep that night. The sand found every gap in the vehicles, and the desert entered our mouths. At dawn, the convoy stopped behind a low ridge while commanders checked signals and maps. Someone handed me a small cup of tea, and for a moment its heat steadied me. The plan was simple. We would move in a tighter column, pass through 3 small villages, and then approach the town where the aid center was said to operate. They told us that an American NGO had been seen helping displaced people there, that volunteers were near the building. That news hardened some faces. The leaders said the presence of foreigners would send a message that they could not ignore. I swallowed and listened. My hands did not tremble as much when I thought of the Golden House. When we reached the outskirts of Soweto, the sky felt heavy and low. The town looked tired, mud brick walls, a cluster of small shops, and a narrow lane leading to a building that had once served as a school and now hosted an aid shelter. People moved like shadows, and a faint line of dust marked where other vehicles had passed before us. Our convoy crept forward, and my heartbeat matched the slow rocking of the truck. I could hear the low murmur of women praying quietly, reciting short surahs, calling to Allah for strength. I thought of my mother's voice, of Abib's gentle laugh, and the dream I had held. The driver signaled, and we prepared to move in. The plan felt close now, sharp at the edges like a blade. We had almost reached the lane when the world broke open. From far above, a sound came that I had never learned to read before. A deep, mechanical whine that swallowed the wind. It moved like a living thing. Someone shouted, and in the space of a second, the sky erupted with light and sound. A plane, no, a low-flying aircraft, had appeared without warning. The first strike hit the truck behind ours. The air filled with a scream that seemed to belong to the earth itself. I felt the floor of our vehicle lift, and then drop like a wave. Metal screamed. People shouted names. The convoy was chaos. I remember thinking only of one thing: do not show fear. But my hands were shaking, and the thought of Abib was a bright, painful coin in my chest. Flames leapt and blackened smoke rose in thick ropes. I saw women thrown from seats, scarves torn, faces bleeding. A nearby building exploded, and the ground rolled like it was alive. My ears rang as if filled with cloth. For a moment, I could not tell which way was up. Through the smoke, I saw the truck that had been carrying the others fold like paper. Metal twisted, and a dull orange light licked the sky. The men who had driven us lay still. Someone screamed for medics, and the words spun away into the dust. My mouth tasted of iron. I crawled out from the shelter of the vehicle on hands that were no longer steady. The air burned the inside of my lungs, and each breath felt like glass. Pain found me quickly. A heavy weight had fallen across my legs, and hot fear mixed with the shock that numbed me. I tried to stand and could not. Blood was warm on my hands when I reached out, and I tasted it. Around me the world tore into pieces. Shouts, then silence, then the dull thunder of more strikes. People ran in stuttering shapes, carrying what they could. I saw a child cry and then be quiet, and the sight dug into me deeper than any wound. I remember grabbing something small from my robe and holding it tight. My fingers closed on the smooth edge of the small device I had been told would cut the space between us and the promised mansion. For a brief, terrible second, I thought of the golden house as if it were only a few breaths away. The chaos made thinking impossible. Yet memories came in a steady, cruel parade. I saw the madrasa corridor, the whitewashed walls and the quiet faces, the soft hands that had soothed me. I saw messages from Zainab reading like a distant bell. You will be rewarded. You will join him. I felt ashamed to think of reunion when so many around me were crying out. Still, my heart reached for that promise. A man near me was calling for water. Someone else was trying to lift a heavy piece of metal, and his fingers slid. A woman I had shared tea with at the madrasa lay silent with her head at an odd angle. The sight almost made me laugh and cry at once. There was such pointless tenderness in what we had all been told to do. I tried to crawl toward the lane, to get away from the burning truck and the falling metal, but my body would not answer. The sky above kept moving with long shadows. Planes, I realized, had come back to finish their sweep. I thought of the NGO workers said to be inside the shelter, the kind who had handed out water and medicine. The idea that the message would reach far and wide made something in me steady. We were not only for ourselves. We were for those who had lost loved ones to foreign bombs. The leaders had taught us. I closed my eyes and remembered the image of Abib reaching out his hand in the golden light. If this was the road to him, then the pain would mean something. Then a new shock hit me. A smaller explosion tore the ground near my side, and heat licked my face. My hands were suddenly slick and heavy. I looked down and saw a dark red blooming across my dress. A piece of shrapnel had cut into my thigh. I tried to move and felt a hot, spreading numbness. Sounds became far away, like voices through thick water. My fingers closed tighter around the small object I held. For a terrible moment, I thought of dropping it, of letting everything end in the small chaos around me. But the promise of the house, of the mansion of gold, felt closer than the earth. In my mind, Abib's smile widened. I imagined him standing under a tree of light, waiting. Time stretched and snapped. People passed me, some falling and some dragging others. Someone wrapped a torn cloth around my leg and tied it roughly. I tasted more blood, and the desert sand stuck to it. A medical volunteer, one of the aid workers, bent over me despite the danger, whispering in accented Arabic that did not understand my name. Her hands were gentle as she searched for the wound. She looked up at me with eyes that said, "We are trying." I tried to tell her something, but my voice came out a thin string. My whole body was a drum of pain and memory. I felt a strange calm settle in the middle of it, as if everything had been forgiven and everything was about to be answered. The sky cracked with more sound. I heard orders shouted in hard voices, then the rumble of engines moving away. The strikes seemed to have done enough damage. Some trucks were smoking, others had become little muscle of heat and twisted iron. People who could move were crawling away, carrying each other like fragile bundles. I thought I might be left here on the road, a small broken thing no one could carry. But then a man I recognized from the madrasa came and lifted my shoulders with an effort that made his face go white. He looked at me with eyes that had stopped being soft. "Sister Amina," he said, voice raw. His hand slipped on my arm, and I felt the world tilt. I closed my eyes and held on. As the sun lowered, the dust and smoke mixed into a thick, gray cup that filled the sky. My world reduced itself to a few clear images. Abib's worn jacket, the stitched verses in my pocket, the small device in my hand, the sound of the plane, the boy who had stopped laughing. My breaths came like small waves. The pain in my leg grew into a wide, empty place inside me. I felt my heart slow and then beat hard. Things blurred then cleared. A thought passed through me. If this was how to reach him, then I had done nothing wrong. The dream of the mansion shone like a bright promise at the end of a long tunnel. Then for a moment, everything stopped. The noise, the smoke, the burning metal. All of it faded like a badly tuned radio. I could feel a warmth that was not the fire, a soft pressure like a hand on my forehead. The last clear thing I saw was the face of the man who had lifted me. His mouth moving, but no sound reaching me. He put his lips close to my ear and said something I could not hear clearly, though it sounded like a prayer. My fingers loosened on the object I had held. For an instant, I believed with every small piece of me that I was leaving the road behind. I held to the image of the golden house and felt a peace heavier than any pain. My breath thinned and then stopped being a battle. In the fading light, with smoke curling like black ribbons, I let myself go. I pictured Abib in the light, standing with his hand out, smiling as if he had been waiting a long time. I thought of the madrasa's words, of Layla's soft voice telling me that the mansion of gold would be my home. I closed my eyes on that promise and let the world come to rest. I did not yet know the truth that would reach me after that breath. I did not yet know the vision that would tear apart the house of gold and replace it with something else. All I knew in that moment was love, grief, and the certainty that I would finally hold him again. When I opened my eyes, there was no sound, only stillness that felt alive. The last thing I remembered was fire swallowing the convoy, then pain so deep it erased itself. Now I floated above the desert, watching smoke rise from what used to be our trucks. My body lay among them, motionless, half covered with sand. I should have been afraid, but all I felt was distance, like the world had become a story told about someone else. A faint shimmer spread across the horizon until the whole sky turned gold. I thought the promise was finally coming true. The mansion of gold, I whispered inside my mind, and I began to move toward the brightness as if pulled by a tide too gentle to resist. At first the vision was everything I had dreamed of, arches shining like liquid metal, gardens filled with light, air that smelled of rain and honey. A gate stood open, its doors engraved with words I couldn't read, but somehow understood as welcome home. I stepped forward in awe, expecting to see Abib waiting with the smile that had carried me through every lonely night. But the moment I crossed the threshold, the gold under my feet cracked. The color drained from the walls, and the air grew heavy and sour. The mansion shimmered, melted, and turned into dust. Each piece of brightness fell apart until only gray ash remained. I fell to my knees, weeping into the empty light that once promised eternity. A voice called my name, soft yet powerful enough to fill the sky. I turned and saw a figure standing where the gold had collapsed. He was clothed in light, not the blinding kind that burns, but the kind that reveals. I could see myself reflected in him. My fears, my anger, my blind faith. He said, "You searched for peace through pain. You were told that death could buy love. That was the first lie." His tone carried neither blame nor pity. It simply told the truth. I wanted to hide, but he stepped closer, and every shadow inside me dissolved. My tears stopped. "Who are you?" I asked. He replied, "I am the truth you feared to know, the mercy that waited when you turned away." The light around him stretched, and suddenly we were standing above an endless plain. One side glowed with a calm radiance that felt like forgiveness. The other seethed in dim red haze. He gestured gently. "Look," he said. I saw faces, some peaceful, some filled with despair. The bright side hummed with quiet songs. The darker side trembled with regret. "These are the choices of hearts," he explained. "Each life builds its own dwelling. When I asked where Abib was, the light faded slightly, and the world shifted. I saw him then, standing in shadow, eyes hollow, whispering prayers that vanished before they reached anywhere. My heart broke. Why is he there? I cried. The radiant man looked at me with sorrow. Because he served falsehood and hid his deeds behind piety. Images surrounded us. Abib in meetings I had never known, passing money, arranging routes, speaking to men whose eyes burned with hunger for destruction. I wanted to shout that it wasn't true, but the scenes kept unfolding. He had promised he was a driver for supply convoys. In truth, he had moved weapons and messages for those who spread terror. The radiant man said, "He loved you, but fear ruled him. He believed that serving darkness would earn light. You followed his path, thinking it was devotion." I covered my face, whispering, "I didn't know. I swear I didn't." "You were deceived," he answered. "But deceit can only hold those who refuse to question." His words cut deep yet healed at the same time, like a surgeon's knife removing poison. He turned my gaze toward the world of despair again. The figures there were countless, each bound by the chains of their own hate. They all thought they were right, he said. They thought obedience to men could replace compassion. They thought revenge could heal loss. But the law of love cannot be broken and still bring peace. I wanted to reach down, to pull Abib from the shadows, but the light restrained me. "Every soul has its moment of truth," he said. "Yours is now." I felt the weight of my own choices. The anger I had cherished, the voices I had followed, the blind certainty that killing could be holy. Each thought became a stone, and I let them fall one by one. Then the scenery changed. The gray haze opened into a valley filled with gentle light, neither dazzling nor dim. Trees shimmered as if made of wind, and rivers glowed from within. Peace here was not silence, but harmony. "This is what you were made for," the radiant man said. "Not fear, not obedience to hate, but life that serves life." I wanted to stay, to rest in that calm forever, but he shook his head slowly. "You cannot remain yet. You have words to speak, wounds to heal." "I'm not worthy," I whispered. He smiled, and the warmth of that smile filled the air like dawn. "Worthiness is not earned," he said. "It is accepted." The simplicity of it pierced me deeper than any sermon I had ever heard. We walked along a path of light, and he began to show me moments from my past. The first time I heard the preacher's fiery voice, the night I cried alone and clicked the link that changed my life, the letters promising paradise. Each one replayed with clarity, and I could see the manipulation inside every comforting word. "They told you the Almighty demands blood," he said, "but love never demands destruction. They said killing brings honor, but honor dies the moment innocence is harmed. They said paradise can be earned, but true peace is given, not traded." His words washed through me like water through dust. I realized how small my world had been, built entirely on someone else's anger. We stopped beside a mirror made of air. "Look," he said. I saw myself as I had been. Eyes fierce, face hidden behind devotion, lips murmuring verses I never understood. Then the reflection changed, a woman broken open, crying alive. "You are not the hate you carried," he told me. "You are the compassion you feared to feel." I reached toward the image, and the mirror dissolved into light that wrapped around me like a mantle. My heart filled with something weightless yet strong, grace, though I didn't know the word for it then. For the first time since Abib's death, I felt free from the need to justify anything. The radiant man's eyes shone brighter. "Now you must return," he said. "Tell them what you saw. Tell them love is stronger than revenge." I begged him not to send me back. "The world will never believe me," I said. "They will call me mad or traitor." He replied, "Truth often sounds like madness to those who fear it, but a single voice of mercy can break 1,000 chains." He raised his hand, and light poured over everything. The scene blurred, the valley, the river. Even his face dissolved into brilliance. I felt myself falling through it, weightless, as if being carried by wind. His final words echoed inside me. "Live to unmask the lie, and you will never be alone again." The next thing I knew, I was lying on the same road where I had fallen, my lungs straining for air. The sky was dim, the smoke thinner. My leg throbbed, but pain meant life. Rescue workers moved among the wreckage, calling out for survivors. One of them knelt beside me, pressing cloth against my wound. His eyes were kind, and when he asked my name, I whispered, Amina. He didn't know that it was the first time I had spoken it without shame. As they lifted me onto a stretcher, I looked up at the clouds. For a heartbeat, I saw a glimmer of light shaped like a hand reaching downward. Then it vanished into the sun. When I opened my eyes again, I was in a hospital room that smelled of disinfectant and warm bread. The ceiling above me was white with a faint crack running across it like a map of my old life. Bandages wrapped my leg and shoulder, and a slow beat marked the rhythm of my heart. For a long time, I couldn't tell whether I was alive or caught between worlds. A nurse wearing a light blue scarf smiled when she saw my eyes move. She spoke Arabic with a Jordanian accent I barely understood, but her voice was gentle. I learned later that volunteers from a Christian aid organization had found me on the road and brought me across the border into Jordan. They said I was half dead, my pulse weak, my skin burned, and yet I had whispered one word again and again, light. They told me it took 3 days before I could speak clearly. During that time, strangers cleaned my wounds, fed me soup through a straw, and prayed beside my bed. I did not understand their prayers, but I felt peace when they finished. The small ward had only 6 beds, each with a curtain for privacy. Most patients were victims of nearby fighting, farmers, children, old men. And yet the nurses treated us all with the same care. The first time I tried to sit, my leg throbbed and my vision swam. But the nurse held my hand until the world steadied. I looked at her and asked in a hoarse voice, "Why are you helping me?" She answered simply, "Because love doesn't ask who you were. It just helps who you are now." Her words stayed with me longer than the painkillers. Each morning the sunlight entered through the small window near my bed. It fell across the thin blanket, turning everything gold again. But this time it was real, not the false gold of my old dream. The volunteers often read aloud from a small worn book. I didn't know all their words, but I recognized kindness in every line. One day, a man named Elias sat beside me. He was from Jerusalem and had been driving relief trucks into Jordan for months. His hands were rough, his eyes tired, but his smile was steady. He asked if I wanted to hear music. I nodded. He played a recording on a small speaker, a slow melody sung by a choir. The voices rose like wind, carrying peace with them. I closed my eyes and remembered the valley of light from my vision. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of memory. Weeks passed, and the doctors said I was strong enough to move. Elias arranged a quiet transfer to Israel for further treatment. The journey took place at night through a checkpoint used for humanitarian work. My papers listed me as Amina Rahim, stateless. I carried no identification, only a folder with medical documents and a note signed by the clinic's director asking for mercy on my behalf. The vehicle rattled across rough roads, and I kept looking at the stars through the window. They seemed brighter than before, each one a reminder that light exists even in the widest dark. When we crossed into Israel, the air grew cooler. The driver whispered a short prayer of thanks. I followed his lips and whispered too, unsure of the words but sure of the feeling behind them. The refuge center in northern Israel sat on a hillside covered with olive trees. From my room, I could see the Galilee Valley stretching below like a painting. The place was simple. Stone walls, wooden beds, a small chapel, and a courtyard where survivors met for meals. I arrived still limping, still frightened that someone might discover who I had been. But the staff asked no questions about my past. They called me Sister Amina and told me that here I could rest. I spent hours sitting by the window, letting sunlight fall on my bandaged arm. The warmth reminded me of the presence I had seen in the vision. I began to write in a notebook the nurses had given me. Memories, prayers, and small sentences that came to me at night. Writing became my medicine. One afternoon, a young woman named Ruth brought me a Bible translated into Arabic. She placed it gently on my table and said, "You asked about the words we read." I nodded, afraid to touch it at first. She added, "Read when you are ready. It will explain the light you saw." That evening, as dusk settled over the hills, I opened the book. The paper smelled old, the ink faint, yet every sentence seemed alive. I read stories about mercy stronger than death and forgiveness given freely. Each page felt like an answer to questions I had carried for years. The hatred that once guided me began to seem foreign, something I could study from a distance but no longer wear. When I finished reading the first section, I cried quietly, not from guilt, but from relief. The days turned into months. My wounds healed, leaving pale lines across my skin. I learned to walk without a cane. I helped in the kitchen, cutting vegetables and washing dishes with other refugees. Many had escaped war or persecution. Some were former fighters, others simple families. We shared silence more than stories, but every silence was peaceful. On Sundays, I sat in the chapel, listening to hymns sung in Hebrew, Arabic, and English. Though I understood little, I felt the same warmth that had surrounded me in the vision. I often remembered the radiant man's words. Tell them love is stronger than revenge. I began to understand that love was not weakness. It was the only strength that could rebuild what war had broken. After 6 months, Ruth suggested that I record my story. There are many who need to hear how hate deceives, she said. Your voice can reach them. I hesitated. If I speak, they will find me. She shook her head. We will protect your name. But truth must travel farther than fear. That night, I sat in front of a small camera in the chapel. The light from a single lamp touched my face. My hands trembled at first, then steadied. I spoke slowly, telling how grief had turned into anger, how anger had led me to the madrasa, and how the promise of paradise had blinded me. I described the explosion, the vision, and the lesson I had learned. I did not mention names or groups. I only said that lies dressed as faith are the most dangerous chains of all. When I finished, silence filled the room. Ruth pressed her hand over mine and whispered, "You are free now." We prayed together. Her voice steady, mine still learning the language of peace. The next day, volunteers began translating my testimony into different tongues. They promised it would be shared quietly through networks that reached places where open preaching was impossible. I didn't seek fame or recognition. All I wanted was to warn others not to make the same mistake. Whenever I thought of the women from the madrasa, I prayed that light would find them too. Sometimes at night, I dreamed of their faces softening, their eyes opening to truth. Those dreams became my mission. Living in hiding taught me simplicity. I moved between safe houses, carrying only a small bag with clothes, a notebook, and the Arabic Bible. Each new place smelled different. One of soap, another of spices, another of damp stone, but everywhere I felt the same peace. I worked with aid teams under an assumed name, helping distribute food to refugees from Syria and Lebanon. No one guessed who I had been. When people asked why I volunteered, I said, because someone once helped me when I did not deserve it. That was enough. Every act of kindness felt like a small repayment for the darkness I had once served. And each sunrise reminded me that I had been given back time for a reason. Sometimes I still think of Abib. His memory hurts, but it no longer poisons. I pray for him whenever I see light reflecting on the sea. I ask that mercy reach him somehow, wherever his soul has gone. I do not pretend to know the mysteries of eternity. I only know that love is wider than punishment. In the refuge, we often repeat a simple prayer. Let peace begin with me. I whisper it each night before sleep. It reminds me that forgiveness is not forgetting. It is refusing to let the past decide tomorrow. The scars on my body ache when the weather changes, but I welcome the pain. It keeps me humble. It reminds me that life is a second chance, not a reward. Now, as I record this final testimony, the olive trees outside sway in the afternoon wind. The air smells of salt and sun. My voice is weaker than before, but steady enough to carry meaning. I want whoever hears this to understand that I am not special. I am simply someone who was lost in hatred and found in mercy. I once believed that killing could honor God. Now I know that love is the only way to reflect his nature. I once sought a mansion of gold built on promises of blood. Now I live in a small stone room filled with peace, and that is more than enough. I no longer crave paradise tomorrow. I try to build a little of it in every act of kindness today. If you are listening to me from a place of anger or grief, I beg you, question every voice that urges you to hate. Ask yourself if the God you serve truly needs death to prove devotion. Listen for the quiet truth beneath the noise of preachers and recruiters. The voice of love never shouts. It waits. It invites. It heals. I learned that too late for many, but not too late for me. I have seen the cost of blind obedience and the power of forgiveness. Do not let pain make you a weapon in another man's hand. Let it make you a healer instead. The world has enough wounds. It needs menders now. To those who believe, pray for those still caught in darkness. Pray for the women in secret schools who are being told that their worth depends on sacrifice. Pray for the children learning anger before they learn compassion. Pray for the men who think that revenge will save them. I am one of them, redeemed. If love could find me on a burning road, it can find them anywhere. And to those who do not believe, I ask only for your understanding. Hatred grows when we stop seeing each other as human. Mercy begins when we listen. If my story helps one person choose life over death, then my survival has meaning. I remain a fugitive in this world, moving quietly from place to place, but my heart is no longer running. It has found rest. The sunlight that once frightened me now feels like a friend. When I wake each morning and see its warmth spreading across the walls, I whisper the same words that ended my dream in the desert. Thank you for another day. My faith is no longer built on promises of gold, but on the simple truth of love given freely. I end my testimony with the same plea I spoke into that first recording, the one that started this journey of grace. Don't believe the lie. No house of gold can match the love I found in him.